Well, welcome back, everyone. Hopefully, you've taken the time to go through the problem sets and have answered them. And what I like to do is just go through the solutions in case you had any questions about them. So remember, what I gave you was a data set from the Framingham Heart Study showing the relationship between a different exposure, whether a person was on anti-hypertension medication to lower their blood pressure at the 1956 examination. There were 144 people who reported being on hypertension medication at the 1956 exam. There were 4,229 who claimed they were not on hypertension medication. Among those people who were on hypertension medication, 20 of them reported having pre-existing coronary heart disease at the 1956 exam. And among those not on hypertension medication, 166 reported having pre-existing heart disease. So the first question was a simple calculation. First question was just asked, what would be the prevalence of coronary heart disease among those people who were on hypertension treatment at that time? So if I go back to this table, there were 144 such people who were at risk of having coronary heart disease. 20 of them reported having pre-existing coronary heart disease. So the prevalence would be 20 divided by 144, which is equal to 0.14. 14% of them had coronary heart disease. That's the prevalence among people on medication. Now, what's the prevalence of coronary heart disease among the people who are not on hypertension medication? If I go back to the table, there are 4,229 such people. 166 of those reported having pre-existing coronary heart disease. So the prevalence of coronary heart disease among people who were not on antihypertension medication would be the 166 divided by the total number of such people, which was 4,229. And if you work out that calculation, it turns out to be equal to 4%. So this might be surprising. The prevalence of coronary heart disease is actually higher among people who are on medication compared to people who are not on hypertension medication. It's 3 or 4 times as high. So now here's where the epidemiologist within you starts clicking in. What are the reasons that you might think are the possible explanations for why the higher prevalence is seen among people who are on treatment for hypertension rather than for other people who are not on treatment? Well, I gave you a series of questions to think about that. The first one says, all things being equal, what is the reason for the higher prevalence among people on hypertension due to the fact that hypertension treatment increases or decreases the risk of developing coronary heart disease? Remember, we said in the lecture, one of the determinants of prevalence is incidence. The amount of new cases of disease that develop over time in a population will tend to increase the prevalence of disease. So if we have a group of people on medication with a higher prevalence, one possible explanation is that the reason they have higher prevalence is because they're at higher risk of developing heart disease over time. Possible, but probably not a likely explanation. Mathematically plausible, but clinically probably not reasonable. So another possible explanation deals with the notion of duration, how long people live with their disease. So is the reason why all other things being equal, is one reason why the people on hypertension medication have higher prevalence because they have longer duration? In other words, their treatment increases their survival time, or having shorter duration. And as I said in the lab, in the lectures beforehand, another determinant of prevalence is the duration of disease. The longer people live with their disease, the more cases of disease will be detected when you come along at a point in time and survey that population. So in this particular situation, all other things being equal, longer duration in the hypertension group, people being treated with hypertension might be an explanation why they have higher prevalence. Another possibility talks about the role of confounding. You have groups of people on hypertension medication versus those who are not on hypertension medication. Maybe the group of people who are on hypertension medication are the people who have smoking more, have higher cholesterol levels. They have more other risk factors for developing heart disease. And that's the reason they have higher prevalence. Or could it be that they have less other risk factors? And would that increase their risk of developing hypertension and be the of developing heart disease and leading to the higher prevalence? Well, as I said in the lecture, the two determinants of prevalence are incidence and duration. And if the reason for higher incidence among those people on medication is the type of person who receives medication, the people who tend to smoke and have high cholesterols, that might be the reason they have higher incidence. That might be the reason they have higher prevalence. So in this case, you would argue that a possible reason would be that the people on medication for their hypertension may have other risk factors for developing coronary heart disease. Another possibility is the role of bias, measurement bias. Could it be that the people who are on hypertension medication are being tested more often for having coronary heart disease? And therefore is the reason for them having higher prevalence is because they are tested more often or tested less often? Well, again, as I said in lecture, the two influencing factors for prevalence are incidence and duration. Maybe the two groups, people on medication versus people not on medication, have the same incidence. Maybe they have the same duration of disease, but maybe we have a bias here. Maybe not everyone is reporting correctly whether they have coronary heart disease. Maybe because they've never had it diagnosed. And if being on treatment means that for your hypertension means you see your doctor more often, and seeing your doctor more often increases your chances of having coronary heart disease detected, that might be the reason you have a higher prevalence of coronary heart disease in that population. So everything up to now has been a copy or an implication or an effect of what we said in the lecture. But here's the last question I asked you to think about. It deals with the timing of the administration of the antihypertension medication. All of the things being equal, same incidence, same duration, could it be that the higher prevalence of coronary heart disease among those being treated for hypertension could be because hypertension treatment increases the risk of developing coronary heart disease, or is it the other way around? That once you develop coronary heart disease, you're at higher risk now for being treated for hypertension. This is another problem with prevalence data. It's a time problem, not knowing what came first, the chicken or the egg. We saw in this data set that people who were being treated for hypertension were more likely to have coronary heart disease. Another way of saying that is people with heart disease are more likely being treated. So the reason for the association may well be because treatment has some influence on your chances of developing heart disease or the duration of heart disease if it develops. But it's also likely, and probably very true, the most likely explanation here, that the reason we're seeing this association is that people who developed coronary heart disease and survived it were then treated by their physicians in certain ways to minimize their chances of having another heart attack. And one way of doing that is by lowering their blood pressure. So this last option here is probably, in my opinion, the main reason we're seeing a higher prevalence of disease among those people treated for antihypertension medication. Treatment for antihypertension medication hopefully is going to lower your risk of getting heart disease, not increase it. It might have no influence on your duration of disease if you develop it. But with a cross-sectional prevalence study like this, where you measure the relationship between hypertension treatment and coronary heart disease existence at one point in time and find an association like we did, causes the problem with that we don't know what came first. We don't know that the reason for the association has anything to do with treatment influencing the chances of developing heart disease, or as the second option is suggesting, that heart disease influences the chances of being put on treatment. And in my opinion, this is probably the most plausible explanation for the association we see. So I'm going to stop here in terms of my lectures or comments about prevalence. This will be followed by a stated demonstration where you'll be going through using the Framingham data set, some calculations involving prevalence, and later on you'll have a homework set where you can get your hands-on experience in measuring prevalence of outcomes in certain groups of people. So I will see you next time.